I have bells on each of our doors, and those bells will ring by themselves. No one comes in the door, no one's going out the door. The bells will just ring. A book falling off the shelf when there's no one else in here. Curtains opening when no one is in that room. So those are the kinds of things that we experience here.
I think what's interesting is not whether or not these stories are true, but what they mean. Why do we tell them? Why do we want to hear them? When Amanda launched her ghost tours, tickets sold out. That means something. We want to hear these stories. Why?
I really feel like in this space, I get to be the keeper of tales and stories. People come in here and will share. When people share those things with me, I feel like I do have a duty and an honor to share it with the general public. Part of the reason why I did the ghost tours and started those in 2019, it was a request made of me, and I was really struggling with it, and I wasn't sure how I was going to be able to do it. But when I took on the perspective of, is a ghost a place? Is it a memory? Are they tales or stories that have been told but have been forgotten? And we can think about all of those things in the sense we would think about a ghost. What defines a ghost? Can it be a place, right? Can it be something of forgotten memory, right? I think it can. So this is the Mifflin Inn. It was the original inn of the town. This was a place that cattle drovers would come to spend the night. It was $5 to spend a week, and that included breakfast and dinner. No women were allowed to stay here, only men. People have said that they see a ghost cat in these windows. They would just see it as they were driving by.
Why a cat?
This was an inn. They would have had grain. They had horses that needed to be fed here. And so there were probably cats here because of mice, right? My first ghost tours, hands down, it was a majority of Gahanna residents interested in what I was going to talk about. And I don't think they really realized it isn't just ghosts, because like I said, I feel like a ghost could be a building that people are like, why is that there? What was it used for? Or I don't know the history of that place. When we would go on these tours, they would say, I didn't know. I didn't know that this existed in my own town. And I think it's important to share those stories. I like to think of myself as the keeper of them. I like to pass them on. I like to pass that knowledge on because, it literally ingrains you into the fabric of your community, right? It makes you a part of the story yourself. I think it would be completely appropriate to stop here and talk about this.
Is this the well?
This is the well.
Okay, so tell me about the story behind this well.
There was a neighborhood legend that somewhere in this neighborhood, there was a child who fell in a well and died. We frequently have here at the Herb Center people who will stop in who claim to be psychic, and a lot of them will talk. They just say, I'm drawn to the house. I was drawn to the house. And they frequently come to the backyard. And they have told us about Arthur, and that's what they have told us his name is, and that he likes to hang out around the gardens back here.
Well, last time we had talked, you also had mentioned Arthur had a bit of a connection to the Herb Center house as well, because of the connection of women and women's history to that house. Yes. Can you tell me more about that again?
This house has always been an integral place for women.
If this house has such a strong connection to women, why does that bring Arthur from this yard, which is the place he died, where ghosts tend to be connected? He comes over to that space and likes to watch you. If it's connected to women, why does he come that way?
I think, you have to think a child who died tragically, they would be looking for that maternal energy. He's seeing us tend to the plants. It's a safe place for him. I always talk to him when I'm out here in the garden and just say, hello, Arthur.
I love that. We're behind the Herb Center now, and we look right across the street, and we see these giant new office spaces, this development.
Right.
Talk about the relationship between the house and the history and what's happening across the street.
This house has been here for a long time, since 1855. Being this cornerstone of the community, I think people automatically just get a sense that it is kind of the flagship for the community and what it was. And Creekside we can look at and say, this is where it is now, but we still have a reminder of where we came from. And I think that's important.
And it really makes this stick out when you have so much new development and then right across the street, and you can hear how loud it is, you can see how many cars are going by. This is a busy street. There's a lot of development over there, but then you have this, and you have so much history, and it's just such a juxtaposition.
If these walls could talk, what would it tell us about Gahanna?
I think the location of the house is really important in these stories. I mean, just walk up Mill Street and you can see two very different worlds. On the east side is Old Gahanna and the Herb Center, and on the west side is this newly developed area, Creekside. And you can see the dramatic difference. There's a difference in height. There's a difference in architecture. It's two very different worlds, developed versus historical, coming together right at that street. And the Herb Center is right there on the front lines of that. Gahanna is in a spot where there's a lot of mingling worlds, a lot of colliding worlds, and that has a lot of very different lifestyles in one community. To the west is urban Columbus, and to the east is rural Ohio. You can look at politics. On the voting map, Gahanna is kind of a purple spot in between some deep red and some deep blue. Route 62, also known as Mill Street, runs all the way from the Texas-Mexico border up to Niagara Falls. And it used to be historically a cattle driving road that was the connection between the rural farms and the more urban spots. So we have past and present, we have historical and developed, we have progressive and conservative, we have resident and visitor, destination and departure. Gahanna as a city is in between a lot of different kinds of worlds, and that's known as a liminal space, those in-between areas. Folklore can be a sense-making tool when our structures fall apart. When our categories don't work, it can be really hard to make rules that work in those spaces, but that's where folklore and stories can really help take the place of those rules and help us make sense of how to navigate those spaces.
Okay, so we've looked around the area, we've looked at the outside, and you've told us about this space, but I really want to get inside and hear about and see where you've experienced some of these, should I call it supernatural? What do you call it?
Yeah, supernatural experiences. I consider them the occupants of the house.
The occupants.
They're here all the time. We're only here some of the time. We share the space with them. And I think that the house has residual occupants, energy, whatever you would like to say. Is it scary? I think it's scared some people. I think it's surprising. I don't know if haunted is the right word.
Yeah, Amanda's stories might feel anticlimactic, relative to what we might see as a ghost story on the big screen or even the screens in our living rooms or our phones. It's a lot more common for ghost stories to be very anticlimactic, just disembodied voices or whispers, or sometimes they're tricksters and they move things. You might see things falling off of shelves, noises, footsteps, etc. This is the kind of things that are really common in everyday ghost stories.
Especially one of the offices upstairs in the closet. Frequently they will hear noises. Everyone has tried to chalk it up to maybe there are birds or squirrels in the attic or other things happening, because everyone wants to normalize things that happen that they can't explain, right? Everyone wants to normalize it.
So there's an interesting tension between like the supernatural and the rational there. And it's like a sort of discourse. Like, what do I believe? What don't I believe? And ghost stories are a way for us to figure that out. I tell you a ghost story, but I also say, here were the conditions. It was dark. Maybe, it was just a trick of the fire and the shadows and whatnot. That's me making sense of things. or I say, I know what I saw, right? And you can have either of those, and even sometimes in a story, both of those together, kind of fighting each other. That tension is us having a discourse and making sense of what we believe, especially in a society where the supernatural and the rational are seen as opposite ends of a spectrum.
I think as far as the entities or energies that reside still in the house, honestly and truthfully, I think they just want to be acknowledged. They clearly have a connection that has lasted to this space. It's all about the space, the place. We've talked about Arthur in the backyard, so we know who Arthur is and why he's there. As far as in the house, I can have my suspicions of, is Mary Miller Patton still attached to the house? It could be Mary Miller Patton, whom without this house wouldn't be on the National Register of Historic Landmarks.
It's really common for ghost stories to have two parts. So there's the supernatural part, and then there's the historical part. We want to know, who was the ghost? Where did they come from? What's their motivations? And we see that here. We have both parts. Stories, folklore, and especially ghost stories, they're not just a way for us to make sense of the future and death. They're also a way for us to make sense of our sense of place and our past and our history.
She lived in this house. She lived to be 102 years old, was the first female insurance agent in the state of Ohio. She was a teacher. She was a really well-educated woman, was in a club called the Century Club, where she had traveled to a lot of different countries. I know I have a picture where she had traveled to Baghdad.
My Aunt Mary, she was always going somewhere. I spent many an evening at Port Columbus Airport when she'd come back from her world tours. She's been to China before it was Red China. She'd go to Russia to buy watches. She smuggled into Baghdad during the war. She flew to Amman, Jordan, left her passport in the hotel, went to the border with a Hallmark greeting card that she got from some professor at the University of Michigan. Apparently he had ties to Iraq. And then the Iraqi stamp got put on the Hallmark greeting card, and she went through I think they called it the Road to Death, from Jordan all the way up to Baghdad as a guest of Saddam Hussein. He paid the bill. When she went to check out, it was paid for. She didn't care one bit about that war. She wanted to see the Babylonian festival before she died.
It could be Bunny Giroux, for all we know, because she had such a hand in creating this place and really bringing it to life. For the history display, when we were formulating it, putting it together, deciding what we wanted to honor, we decided we were going to focus on the herb ladies. And when we say herb ladies, a lot of people remember Bunny Giroux, who was a force in and of herself. She was the first female city council member here. She founded the Ohio Herb Center. She was doing tour groups. She owned Culpepper's Herb Shop. Her memory is still so ingrained in Gahanna, the very fabric of Gahanna. She is a very strong thread. And her legacy lives on through the Herb Center. We are carrying the torch for Bunny. But there were these other women standing next to her anytime they were traveling around the state or doing a talk about herbs. So I think these strong, powerful women are definitely a part of Gahanna's history.
Jeannie Banks Thomas is a folklorist that called this the deviant femme pattern in ghost stories, where a lot of times we see it being very violent. La Llorona, Bloody Mary, etc. But it's not always about violence. Sometimes it's just women behaving unusually relative to what's expected. And in Amanda's stories, she really focuses on women behaving and leading in spaces that were outside of expectation. They're leading on their own. They're being in spaces and in roles reserved for men. But on the flip side, they're also exhibiting these very traditional maternal characteristics, these feminine qualities. And when you pair both of those together, it's just such a fascinating combo that they're in these spaces and they're rejecting some norms, but they're doing it with such powerful femininity and such powerful maternity.
I remember, growing up, we grew up like Donna Reed. Before Dad would come home for work, Mom would have us bathed and in clean dresses while he got home. So for her to go out of that and then, do the Herb Society and do the log cabin and do all that, When I look back at this, I think, my God, Jinx, what she did. And the legacy, that's the big word, what she gave Gahanna. And she didn't want the notoriety. She didn't want any of that. She just wanted to do it. I'm glad she did.
We had a conversation and said, let's create this display to honor the people who came before us. Sometimes we like to claim things for ourselves. I definitely have benefited from working here and have notoriety because of it. I'm teaching classes, people know who I am. I've had magazine articles, podcasts, but it's all on the backs of these women who came before me. The history display was a way to allow the public to become aware of their story. The disturbances, once we put the history display up, kind of quelled. They settled down. And I really believe us telling their story through a display as simple as it is, we then become their storyteller. We become the person who's keeping their memory alive, telling a new generation of people about them.
Herbs are a part of folk beliefs. They are a part of folk medicine. There's something important about herbs with the herb ladies. There's also a sort of caretaking role that gets attributed to maternal or feminine aspects. And Amanda is exhibiting all of those, right? She's championing the herbs in her work in the Herb Center, but also telling the stories of the herb ladies and exhibiting the same characteristics and qualities that we see in the herb ladies. Amanda very much is the next generation of herb ladies.
When she died, they called me at 1 a.m. and said, your mom's passed. And I said, I'll be right there. And she had cousins called the Four Freshmen. I think 2 of them were her cousins. So as I'm driving, I said, Mom, if you're okay, give me a sign. And that Christmas song came on from the Four Freshmen. Snowflakes whisper. So I knew she was okay.
Even death itself is a liminal space, and we describe it that way when we say someone is passing away. It doesn't matter whether you believe in an afterlife or believe in nothing, that's a transitional state. And folklore helps us make sense of what we think comes next. It's a way for us to make sense of that liminal space. Death is just kind of the last frontier.
My first supernatural experience, I was 8 years old. It definitely was, traumatic. My father passed away in a car accident, and being 8 years old, a very traumatic, tumultuous time in a child's life to have something like that happen. And I was sleeping, and he called my name, and I looked up, and he was standing at the foot of the bed. As any 8-year-old would, got very scared, covered my head back up because, your father, who you had just been to his funeral, is standing at the end of your bed. And I sat there for a minute, and this is, I feel like, a very catalyst moment for me. I pulled the covers back again. I looked again. And I feel like I've been doing it my whole life, looking again.
Beautiful white snowfall.
That's a live human being.
Is there a live human in the kitchen?
Is that Catherine?
Is that a ghost named Catherine?
I think it's the ghost. I think Catherine.